Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, we are welcoming Justine to the podcast. Justine, I am super excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So let's get started. Can you tell us how long you've been married and about your fantastic husband?
I have been married for just shy of 8 months to my wonderful husband, and we've been loving it and growing and learning, and it's been great.
That is fantastic. So, Justine, what was your first introduction to NFP, and how did you react learning about it?
So I think kind of growing up, I was very rhythm method-y. And then I was in a kind of book group that one of the upperclassmen girls was doing at our Newman Center in college. And I was kind of reintroduced to the topic as this is something we're expected to do still. And I think it really kind of took me back. And I was like, oh, this is shocking. Yeah.
Right. With the thought that you had of NFP being the rhythm method.
Right.
And then just being told like, yeah, we still have to practice this. And it's like, hold up, the rhythm method doesn't work. Like, why do I have to practice that?
Exactly. It was very shocking. And I even remember like taking a step back, and I went to this dining hall on our campus and I cried to my now husband. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't go back there. Like, they'll never be my friend. I don't know if I can keep being Catholic. And it was just very, it was an experience that I'll probably always remember, because I just was so taken back and I was so shocked. Like, how are we expected to do this very antiquated thing? I don't want 100 kids.
I'm not sure anybody wants 100 kids.
I know. But
right. Well, and I think that just really speaks to the point of something we talk about a lot on this podcast, is that introduction to NFP needs to happen sooner, and it needs to be a good introduction to NFP. And by good, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be like this fabulous, amazing thing. It needs to be good in that it has good information. It needs to actually share the current methods. So you said you kind of like stepped away from the Newman Center. You were like, I'm not so sure about being Catholic anymore. I think you had mentioned to me before that your, at the time, boyfriend, now husband, wasn't Catholic. So he was kind of like, he was like, well, yeah, maybe you don't need to be Catholic.
Right. Yeah. He's, my husband's a convert. And so when we had this conversation, he was kind of like confused because he didn't really know what I was talking about.
Sure.
And I was
like, what the heck is this?
And I was very emotionally distraught by it. And he was just like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, we could just he was like, you can just convert to the Protestant denomination I am. And I was like, no, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this is the church. Like, nothing makes sense. And it was a very kind of jarring experience that I think I dealt with kind of inwardly. I don't remember like talking to too many friends about it. There's like 2 or 3 friends who I think I really leaned on to try and figure it out and was honest with about struggling with that. And I think they really kind of like just kind of assured me that they would still love me if I needed to figure this out on my own. But it was a really kind of point of contention that in the end, I think led to a really kind of beautiful kind of reversion experience of someone who was raised like a cradle Catholic and just kind of going through the motions. And it kind of helped me really lean into some of the more hard teachings of the faith. And I'm really thankful for that and for NFP.
Sure.
So
yeah. Well, I think many of us have come across a teaching, or many, that we've struggled with. And, this is a podcast about NFP, but sometimes I get a little theological. Like, if you're struggling with a teaching, that's okay. It is okay to wrestle and struggle with a teaching. And what you need to do is seek answers. What's not okay is to say, oh, I don't like that answer, I'm just gonna like shut my ears off and like walk away. Like don't do that.
Right.
Seek answers, seek out friends, close friends, seek out your parish priest. All of the documents of the church are accessible on the Vatican website if you want to like go that way. But I would suggest like a priest first, because they might be able to direct you towards a good document. Anyway, a little bit of a side tangent. I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so you kind of stepped away from the Newman Center for a time, and you were really struggling with the church teaching and the church teaching on NFP, and if that was what the church taught, then how could you really be Catholic? So how did you begin to kind of overcome that?
So I think what really started was I have a background in science. I have a degree in biology. And so I sat in my dorm room for hours and I looked up church documents and I said, okay, this is fine, but still, I don't know if this will actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I Googled, I think I started with YouTube, and I was like charting your cycle. And a lot of it was very like, I think the one on like howto.com was there. And it was like a lady with a calendar writing temperatures in the calendar boxes. But then I found But then I found a couple really great YouTube channels of women who charted from a secular perspective. And then I kind of found real research, real scientific literature about the effectiveness of fertility awareness-based methods, and that women do this all the time. And that is kind of a separate kind of secular, like health, body literacy focus movement. And I was like, oh, this looks legit. And I found that there were several different methods, and that there's whole healthcare communities who participate in these sort of things that really help women heal their bodies, heal. I think that after finding all of this research, I really realized that NFP had this true scientific bearings, and that it wasn't just something that the church made up. And so I think once I could like make it make sense in my brain, which is a way I go about many things, I'm like, if you can make it make sense, like I can get on board. And I think once I reached that, I really jumped on the NFP girl in my friend group, but I consider that a blessing.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of things here. One is that like, it's totally normal to need something to make sense before you can get on board with it. And then the other thing is like, if you take a step back, and if the church actually was asking us to practice the rhythm method, and that was our only option, like that would be a pretty difficult thing to like accept. Like that would be pretty hard. And that's the beauty in some parts of Humana Vitae that Pope Paul VI spoke on in that document of he really encouraged the continual research of these methods of fertility awareness, and he encouraged them to get better and better. I think he really saw the future in that. I mean, that whole document's really prophetic, but even just in the future of fertility awareness, I think he really saw like, okay, there is a real science behind this, and we need to, as a culture, as humanity, we need to research these and find more methods and find more things that work for tracking the cycle and helping women in just understanding their fertility in a basic sense. So that's awesome. So something else that I would really like you to share is you had mentioned to me before we recorded this that this whole foray into learning about body literacy and fertility awareness and NFP and kind of like helping yourself get back on board with this teaching also led to a change in your career trajectory as a whole. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I had learned all of this going to college, getting a degree in biology, which I think my original plans, I think very original plans was to be a teacher, which is a beautiful calling, but it didn't end up being mine. Um, and then later I took a women's health course as a gen ed, and it was in our nursing department. And I kind of was like, oh, like I like helping women. I like learning about women's health. I like sharing women's health. I did my project in that class on NFP, and everyone thought I was crazy, but I loved it.
Probably.
And I loved sharing about it. And so after I finished that first degree, I went back to school 4 days after graduation to get an accelerated bachelor's of science in nursing, with the hope of eventually becoming an advanced practice nurse in the women's health field, and kind of being that healthcare provider that listens to women who do use NFP, who do chart their cycles, and kind of adding to this wonderfully growing group of healthcare providers who take the scientific body literacy side of charting your cycle and using it to treat the underlying causes of all these things that women experience today in terms of fertility and health. Because I think that luckily it is a growing demographic of providers, but I think that the more the merrier. And I think that just from my own personal experience and the experience of my friends, I think that's something we really need. We need providers who understand that we are body and soul, and that we have kind of a greater something here, and there's something to kind of reach. And so I hope to kind of be among those numbers someday. I'm still relatively new in my career.
That is so fantastic. We definitely need more, more, even just on a basic sense, we need more Catholic nurses and doctors and people in the healthcare field, and just people in healthcare who understand that what you just said, Justine, that we are body and soul, and that there's more to us than just our bodily functions. And that's something we definitely don't see, when we head over to the doctor's office and, without even really listening to anything that's told to us, it's like, well, here's a prescription for the pill. And it's like, I think there's a lot more than, than just that. Oh man, that is so fantastic. And I am so excited for you, Justine, in this career that you are pursuing right now. And I know you're going to do phenomenal things. And if anybody's listening to this and you're like in college right now and you're like, I couldn't do what Justine did. I couldn't go back and do another bachelor's degree, but this sounds really cool. Think about it, pray about it. Maybe it will work out for you. All right. So switching gears a little bit, once you got married, what would you say was the most difficult aspect of using NFP in your marriage?
I think that with a lot of things in marriage, there's learning curves. And I think there's this moment, at least that we personally hit. It's like, okay, we've talked about this, we've learned about this, but will it really work?
Mm-hmm.
And I think hitting that, and then also just like figuring out transitioning from like chastity and setting very strong boundaries to having a physically intimate relationship. And so you're hit with some of the anxieties of that whole learning curve of like how to have a sex life with your partner and how to do so in a way that you're both comfortable and you're both growing and learning and like feeling emotionally safe and all these things, but then also like having this very different way of planning your family that's different from many people, and being like, is this the real, like, this is the real deal now. So let's hope that we're right.
Right. I mean, there's a certain amount of trust that you have to put in the method. And there's a certain amount of trust that you have to put in God too. I mean,
Right.
he brought you two together as husband and wife. And he's got a plan for your family. And it might not look like your plan.
Exactly.
And so, understanding that very difficult aspect of just really trusting in the Lord. Now we know that the efficacy rates of, modern methods of fertility awareness that we use in NFP are extremely high. We know that, but there's still an element of trust. I mean, even if you just step over into the realm of birth control, there's an element of trust that you put in the pill. There's an element of trust that you put in a condom, and the only method I shouldn't even say this, but the only method that is 100% effective is abstinence. But that didn't work for Mary, but that's okay. But everybody else that should work for.
Without divine intervention.
Yes.
Without
divine intervention. The only method that is 100% effective is abstinence. And that we know across all boards. I mean, your doctor will say that to you while prescribing the pill. But I'm rambling at this point, but going back to trusting in the Lord.
I think that there's a point where you're standing between kind of your whole expectations for marriage and like your sex life really, and like realizing what openness to life means. And that we kind of, and I think that was something really beautiful to like lean on, is that like, this is what it means for us. This is what we've discerned at the moment. And whatever we've discerned, hopefully we've done well. And if not, like, this is like, God has the opportunity, I say with air quotes, to kind of be like, nope, you were wrong. So here's what the plan really is. And I kind of found real beauty in that, and real like being able to kind of lean in that openness to it has been really, it's been, I think, a really like a grace-filled moment almost.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's something that everyone listening, just really take that into your prayer, either with just yourself. What does openness to life really mean, Lord? And how am I going to practice this? Whether you're married or not. And if you are married, bring that to prayer with your spouse. What does openness to life really mean? What are we saying when we're saying we're open to life? Even if you are actively trying to avoid, you're still open to life, and so what does that truly mean? And ask God to reveal that to you, because that's going to be some really mind-blowing revelations that you will likely make.
Right. And even if you are avoiding at the time, and you still, I think it's really important to kind of sit and think, like, if we are not called to be open to life in physical children, or to air quotes again, be fruitful in physical children, like how are we to be fruitful right now? I think that leaning into where you are called to be fruitful, where you are called to bring life into the world in your work, in your relationships with friends and family, that sort of thing. I think that leaning to that in prayer is really important, and kind of helps us discern further later down the road, at the next opportunity to discern.
Absolutely. Well, and there are so many ways to be fruitful beyond just like actually having children. Some of the most fruitful marriages that I know don't have kids. They weren't blessed with kids. My youth minister growing up was one of their marriage was one of the most fruitful marriages that I have ever come across. And I strive to be like them daily. And they were never blessed with children, but they were able to welcome so many lives into their lives, and bless just so many people, and act as spiritual mother and father, act as godfathers and godmothers to so many people. Wow, I could just go on and on. This is on my mind today. But being fruitful, being open to life doesn't just mean let's have all the babies.
Right.
So, I think one more thing I wanted to touch on before we close this episode out is that feeling that you sometimes get when using NFP, that you're sitting on an island by yourself, and that you're really not only do you look weird in the secular world, because it's like, well, why aren't you just using the pill? Why aren't you just using birth control? But sometimes you can look weird in your Catholic circles too, because you're that one Catholic couple that uses NFP. How have you guys come to terms with that or dealt with that issue?
I think that's something that I think we have really experienced some kind of struggle with, because we do have a lovely group of friends who kind of are on their own NFP journey in various ways. But I think you described it very well as kind of like you're sitting on an island and you don't know, your secular friend groups are kind of like, oh, that's weird. And then your Catholic friend groups are either kind of on their own journey and in a really different place, or you have like that couple at church that you'd love to have over for dinner, but like, can you talk about it? Like, because since it's so not even really well practiced in the church, like you never really know who can relate and who can't. And you also never, like, I feel like I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And so I feel like there's kind of this kind of like walking on eggshells in most situations.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's not like a really easy question that you could just walk up to anybody in church and go like, hey, do you use NFP? Can we like talk about it?
Right.
Because unfortunately, as we know from studies, the majority of Catholics don't use NFP. And, while if their answer was no, that would be an opportunity for you to share about your experience and, tell them about NFP. It also might be really, really awkward. And so, it's a difficult problem that I think a lot of people are working on ways to solve right now, is like, how do we have these conversations? How do we open this up? I'm about ready to just ask my pastor, like, hey, can I make an announcement at the end of mass? Like, hey guys, I use NFP. If anybody else does and wants to talk about it, let me know. Like,
yeah,
I'm about at that point, but I'm not really sure.
My phone number's in the bulletin,
right? I'll just put an ad in the bulletin, like,
right.
Do you use NFP? Because I do. That might not work. I don't know. Maybe it will. Somebody should try that. Let me know how it goes.
Somebody should.
Oh man. Justine, this has been such a fun conversation. Was there anything else you wanted to add in before we close out?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justine. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to follow us on Instagram for updates and announcements. And if you're not already subscribed to the podcast, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And as always, feel free to reach out if you ever have questions or comments about an episode. I love chatting with you guys. Until next time.